Hi, this is Brett Ingram, award-winning entrepreneur and digital product creator. And today I want to share with you 7 business and life lessons from the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is coming up really soon. And this year it's going to be the San Francisco 49ers against the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, it's a really interesting matchup for a number of reasons. There are a lot of parallels between the teams, but there are also a lot of things that are very different about them. And what's most interesting is when we take a look at their paths to get there, what they needed to do during the regular season, what they needed to do during the playoffs, the teams that they played, how those games unfolded, and everything else, we get to see narratives that sort of unfold. And it makes it really interesting. They both had very different paths to get there. They both had very different sort of expectations, and they have sort of different profiles as well. While they both obviously achieved a very high level of success, it was different in terms of the way that they both did it and what everyone's expectations were. So it's an interesting matchup because on the one hand, we have basically, who's arguably considered the top quarterback in the NFL today at Patrick Mahomes with the Kansas City Chiefs. And then we have Brock Purdy, who was literally the last pick in the NFL draft just a couple of years ago. And he is going to quarterback the San Francisco 49ers. And so that's completely opposite in terms of the very top versus, I don't want to use the word bottom, but in terms of a draft pick, he was picked basically at the bottom. And so just from the quarterback standpoint, quarterbacks always get a lot of attention. They get a lot of the scrutiny and a lot of the credit because they have such an important role. Obviously, it goes way beyond that because you have all these other players on the teams. You have the skill players and everything else. But what's interesting in terms of their paths to get there is for the 49ers, their most recent game, they had to play the Detroit Lions. And the Detroit Lions came out of nowhere to be a really strong team and actually put up lots of points and everything else and really tested them. They jumped out to a big lead on the 49ers, and San Francisco had to sort of claw their way back in order to be able to survive and move on. The week before that, when San Francisco had to beat Green Bay, they didn't start off very well in that game either. And in fact, it wasn't a very good game for Brock Purdy, the quarterback, but at the same time, they found a way to win that and come from behind as well. And ultimately, after doing that twice in a row, they find themselves in the Super Bowl. If we look at the Kansas City Chiefs, a lot of people, even though they had sort of an up and down year in general, most people predicted that they were going to be very successful in the postseason, largely due to their coach and their quarterback, considered to be two of the greatest of all time in their respective roles and positions on the team. And so everyone knew that the Chiefs would be a difficult team to beat. They also are the defending Super Bowl champions. So they had a lot of credibility. They had a lot of pedigree coming into it. The 49ers have a great pedigree for the organization, but in recent years haven't done anything. And so for the Chiefs, they had to beat the Ravens, and they had to do it on the road. And this was the first year that Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs had to go on the road in order to win games, in order to advance through the playoffs. They were able to win the two road games. And in this last game, they started off really well offensively, and the offense sputtered, but the defense did a really good job to actually keep them in it. So while they're known as an offensive team, they actually found ways to win as well, came back, and now this is the matchup that we've got in the Super Bowl. What's fascinating to me about the Super Bowl and sports in general is that it really does parallel business and life quite well. And if we look at the journeys of these two teams and we look at the matchup that's in front of us coming up soon, there are 7 lessons that we can pull from the basic storylines that we can equate and we can use in our everyday lives and businesses. So the first lesson is that there are many paths to reach our goals, right? We already talked about the fact that the teams had different paths to get to where they're going. But even if we dissect it, even if we dig a little bit deeper, and we look at just the paths for the quarterbacks themselves, Patrick Mahomes came out as basically being billed as a phenom. he was going to be the next great quarterback. He was, going to be somebody that was going to change the face of a franchise. So everybody wanted Patrick Mahomes. Everybody understood what his potential in the league was. For Brock Purdy, he was the last guy picked in the draft, which oftentimes you're lucky if you make it in the league 2 or 3 years. Usually you never really get a legitimate chance to play. And then, unfortunately, you're gone. Even though you're one of the best at your sport in the world, you're just not quite good enough for the highest level in the NFL. So maybe you go to the Canadian Football League, or maybe you go to the USL or whatever they're calling it now in sort of the secondary professional league in the United States. And that's basically what you're relegated to if you can't make the NFL and can't make a career of it. But for him, instead of coming in, being billed as this great thing where everyone was going to build around him and focus on him and build a team around that so he could win, for him, he came in as basically the backup to the backup. So he was the last guy in the quarterback room that anybody ever expected to take any snaps. And then by a weird twist of fate, there were a couple of injuries that happened to both of the quarterbacks that the 49ers had that were playing above him. And so he was thrust into a game situation last year when the guy that they had recently drafted got hurt and the guy that they had who was a veteran before that got hurt. So they ultimately were forced to play him and to see what he could do. Well, he was able to go out and prove himself enough that in the off season, they actually traded off the quarterback that they had drafted with one of the top picks in the draft, and they traded off the other quarterback as well and decided this guy, Brock Purdy, was going to be the starter going forward. So they're both in the Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes, Brock Purdy, but their paths to get there were very, very different. And in business, it's exactly the same way. There are some people that have every advantage and everything that is sort of, the path is laid out for them. All they have to do is go and take it. Other people have to fight, claw, and scratch for every little nugget that they get. But it doesn't mean that they can't be successful also. And so it's important to understand that there are many paths to reach our goals. And so if one door closes or one path gets shut off, instead of feeling like, oh, well, that's it, what we have to do as entrepreneurs and as human beings is we need to find another way. We need to, go in the back door. We need to kick out the side door, punch in the screen, whatever it is, right? Dig a hole underneath and come up on the other side. We have to find a new path to reach our goals. So there's a lot of different ways to get there. It doesn't matter where we start. What matters is what we do with that. The second lesson is that it takes resilience to be successful. This is no more evident and couldn't be more evident than what you see in the world of professional sports. These people have all talent, all world talent, more so than 99% of the other people on the planet. And even still, for a lot of them, success is really elusive. It's not easy to get the results that they want. And it doesn't always happen right away. Some people have to try again. And they keep getting cut, or they keep getting told no, or they keep getting rejected. And they just have to keep at it. If we look at just the two teams' journeys, despite the fact that everybody knows how good the Kansas City Chiefs can be with Patrick Mahomes, they struggled. They had times where they lost games they shouldn't have along the way. They struggled a little bit in the playoffs. They didn't always play their best. And sometimes they had to do what they say is winning ugly, right? It wasn't always pretty, but they got the job done because they never gave up. And they sort of focused on what it is that they wanted to accomplish and kept working at it. And the 49ers, there's no better lesson there because not only did the quarterback have to go through that himself, but also the team in both of the last two rounds of the playoffs had to come back from behind. And in a team where you're expected to win and then you go down by a lot of points, it'd be very easy to choke, or it'd be very easy to feel like, oh no, what are we going to do? I don't think we can do this. But they stuck with it, they were resilient, and they worked through it to be successful. And I'm sure that happens to a lot of the players, even to just make the league itself. In business, it's no different. we're going to have ups and downs. We're going to have challenges. We're going to have roadblocks, obstacles, all that kind of stuff. And so it's not how good we are on our best days when things are easy that determine whether we're successful. It's what we do when the chips are down. It's what we do when we're struggling. It's what we do when we're faced with an obstacle that we weren't expecting. How do we work through that? How do we work through that both physically in terms of solving the problem, but also mentally with the resolve and the determination to keep going and to win regardless and at all costs? And that is a really important lesson in business and in life for a lot of the things we want, because nothing worth accomplishing comes easy. It's always a struggle. There's always work involved. And the fact is, it takes resilience to be able to do that and be successful. The third lesson is that hype doesn't matter. Results do, right? So coming into the AFC Championship game, all the hype, sure, they were building it up as this big game between Mahomes and Lamar Jackson from the Ravens. And certainly there was, plenty of hype for the Kansas City Chiefs also, right? Not just for the Ravens. But the Ravens had home field advantage. They had the best record. They had steamrolled really good teams along the way. And the hype train was in full effect. Lamar Jackson's never been in this situation where, he's had everything clicking on all cylinders. There's always been a reason that he wasn't able to be successful. He's breaking all the records. He's going to be the MVP. He's got a different look in his eye. I read that article a number of times. And all these other kinds of things. And it was all this hype surrounding the fact that the Baltimore Ravens were going to be the team that ultimately needed to go and win. And yet they lost because the Kansas City Chiefs flat out outplayed them. If we look at the other side of it, in terms of the hype was actually on the side of the San Francisco 49ers, right? So they were being hyped up going into it. Could Detroit keep up with this team? Detroit with zero playoff experience. They don't have the same star-studded roster as the 49ers have. Yes, they had an advantage at quarterback on paper because they had a more experienced quarterback, but the weapons that the 49ers had, the pedigree of the organization, their history, their culture, all that other stuff. And when they got on the field, the Lions scored the first 21 points. They didn't care about the hype. They didn't care about your pedigree or your background. Now, the 49ers had that resilience that we already talked about, came back and won the game. But the fact of the matter is, all that mattered was the results. And the Lions went out to set those results. But the 49ers did ultimately come through. And so the hype surrounding Lamar Jackson and the Ravens, it doesn't matter. Now, a day after, when it's over, all everybody sees is the result. And that hype train went to a crashing halt. And so it doesn't matter how much we're billed or not billed, or how much we're, underestimated or overestimated. All that matters is what we do. And in business, it's the same thing. You can have the greatest glitz and the greatest glamour and the greatest sizzle, but if the product doesn't sell, if the service doesn't sell, if the brand doesn't build, if people aren't interested, none of the rest of it matters. It doesn't matter how great people think we are. What matters is what we produce. And by the way, it doesn't matter how bad they think we are either. All that matters is that we produce and what we produce. The fourth lesson is that luck always plays a role. So great entrepreneurs and business people will tell you that, there's no such thing as luck. I create my own luck. I work really hard. I'm really smart. I saw every trend and everything that was going to come down the pipe years before it happened. Sure you did. The fact of the matter is, it's a guessing game. We all guess, and sometimes we guess right, and sometimes we guess wrong. And people that are excellent at guessing right, or lucky for one big guess where there's a lot at stake, end up walking away, patting themselves on the back and feeling like they succeeded because they were so great. That's an element of it. I wouldn't take that away from anybody. But the fact of the matter is, there's always an element of luck. In the NFC Championship game, when the 49ers were trying to make a comeback, Brock Purdy threw a long pass. And it was underthrown. It was actually a bad throw. The Lions defender jumped up to intercept it, and it bounced off his helmet. Now, to the 49ers' credit, the receiver, Brandon Ayuk, was standing right there, had the presence of mind to make the catch, and fell on the ball on the 1 yard line. They subsequently scored a touchdown, won the game, and it's all that anybody remembers is that Brock Purdy led a comeback. But the fact of the matter is, the ball should have been intercepted, or at worst deflected and been, down. Instead, it ended up leading to a touchdown. Luck always plays a role. And you can look at a number of situations in the Chiefs-Ravens game and every other game along the way as well. Whether it's a call, whether it's a bounce of a ball, whether it's a fumble, whether it's a fumble out of bounds. In the Chiefs game, right, you could say it's luck, you could say that it's not. There was a fumble on the 1 yard line. It was a great defensive play. But just because the guy reaches out to make the play doesn't mean the other guy's going to drop the ball. And so luck always plays a role. It doesn't matter, but it's important to acknowledge that. And so we never get too high or too low because we understand that in business also, timing and luck have a lot to do with it and always will impact our ability to be successful or lack thereof. And so we want to take some credit for the work we do for sure, and we want to take some blame for mistakes we make. At the same time, we also want to acknowledge the fact that sometimes things do happen that are outside of our control. The fifth lesson is that believing in yourself and making the most of your opportunities can change your life. And you don't need to ask anyone beyond Brock Purdy that question. Because the fact of the matter is, here's a guy who has basically clawed himself onto the bottom of an NFL roster with very little hope of ever getting into a starting role to throw passes in a real game in the NFL. And based on the fact that he prepared himself, he worked hard, he always believed that if he got the opportunity, he would make it happen. And when that opportunity arose, as unlikely as it was, by the way, luck plays a role. As unlikely as it was, it did happen, and he ended up making the most of that opportunity. He was humble, he believed in himself, he worked hard, and he made the most of that opportunity. And it has literally changed his life. Because whether they win the Super Bowl or not, he's now established himself as a starting quarterback in the NFL. His financial life has completely changed because the next contract he'll sign will be massive instead of the small amount that he was making relative to the NFL players. His career likely will be longer now as an NFL football player as opposed to going into whatever profession he would have gone into in a year or two had that not worked out. The people he'll be associated with, his legacy, his, persona, all of these other things, his entire life has changed because of the fact that he believed in himself, and when he got the opportunity, he made the most of it. And it's a really important lesson for us as human beings and as entrepreneurs, because sometimes opportunities come along where if we grab them, if we're ready for them, and we're ready to take advantage of them, we absolutely can change the entire trajectory of our life with it. And so it's super important that we're able to do that. The sixth lesson from it is that bad decisions can have heartbreaking consequences. It's sad to say because you always want to feel as though you could sidestep that. And you do. If you make a bad decision, you do need to be able to move on. But the fact of the matter is, if we look at the games this past weekend, Lamar Jackson's throw into triple coverage when they were trying to lead a comeback was a really bad decision. You throw that ball, the best option you've got is maybe a pass interference call, and more likely it's going to be intercepted. But even if it's not, the likelihood that you're going to make a touchdown on that kind of a throw is really, really low. It was a really bad decision, and because the ball was intercepted, the Chiefs were able to run out the rest of the clock and it sent the Ravens home in a heartbreaking fashion. For the Detroit Lions, they went for it on 4th and 2, and the coach doesn't regret this, but had he kicked the field goal, the 49ers ended up winning by a field goal. So at worst, if everything else played out the same way, it would have ended in a tie, it would have gone into overtime, and who knows what story we'd be telling the next day. And so he doesn't consider it a bad decision. He considers it what he would do, but if we look at it objectively, it was probably a bad decision. And it had heartbreaking consequences because it sent the Detroit Lions home as well. And in business, it's no different, right? We can't be afraid to make decisions. As entrepreneurs, we have to make decisions. It's our job. But we want to make sure that we're smart about the way we make decisions, that we make them with the highest probability of success. If you throw a pass and it gets deflected in a weird way and gets intercepted, so be it. If you throw a pass in a triple coverage, you're asking for an interception. That's a bad decision. And so we need to weigh our odds. We need to make decisions that make sense, right? We don't want to throw bad money after good, bad effort after good, anything like that, right? What we want to do is we want to be able to put ourselves in a position to make the best decisions possible. So that way we can be successful. And the seventh lesson is that winners adapt and evolve, right? Winners adapt and evolve. If we look at the trajectory for both the 49ers and for the Kansas City Chiefs, very easy to focus on the quarterbacks, their play, their performance. But the reality of it is, it's a team sport, and it's a team sport for a reason. It requires everybody on the field, and it requires coaches and everything else, because it's a complex game with a lot of moving parts. And what the teams showed that ultimately have reached the Super Bowl is that they were able to adapt. They each had their identity coming into the postseason, and neither one of them was able to stick exactly to that identity and win every single game exactly as it played out. They were forced to adapt, play a different style of football, change the way they call plays, change the way they play defense, change the way they play offense, look for other opportunities. And they did that. They adapted to the situation based on the game at hand, and because of that, they were able to evolve the way they played and come out on top. And in business, it's exactly the same thing. The only constant out there is change. And so if we stick our head in the sand and pretend everything's going to be the same, even if we're wildly profitable, we'll be the next IBM, right? We'll be the next Benetton. We'll be out of business. IBM was this close to being out of business and when they were a giant behemoth of a company because they refused to change. They believed that they were too big to fail, and they almost did. The fact of the matter is, we have to keep our eye on the pulse of what's going on, be aware of changes that are coming, and make those adaptations and evolutions so we can continue to be successful in the business world. So those are 7 lessons or observations from the upcoming Super Bowl that we can use in our own businesses and lives too. The takeaway here is that while the Super Bowl is just a sporting event and ultimately a game, watching people who are the best in the world at what they do showcase their talents and compete is awe-inspiring and just plain fun. But if we look deeper into the game and each team's journey to get there, there are themes and stories that parallel the same ones we experience as entrepreneurs trying to accomplish a goal or realize a dream. It's the human condition, striving for greatness, giving everything we've got to be our best and win, and discovering what we're made of along the way.